So I've been doing tech for a little while. 26 years. I think this is my 27th year. But it's interesting because at this point in my life, I feel like I consider myself to be, first and foremost, a martial artist. Brown belt Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I've got several international titles, bunch of medals, things like that. And so my perspective on how I do tech and how I approach a lot of things in life tend to be based on or echoed by some of the fundamentals that I learned in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Now you're probably asking me, I thought I signed up for a talk on DevOps where I was talking about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but one lesson that I have learned from Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is how to put myself into the best position to succeed, right? Which relates. I like to keep myself safe. I like to keep myself out of trouble. I like to keep myself stable, right? When I'm grappling with someone, I don't want to put myself in risky positions that I can't get myself out of. There's an adage in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu that's called position before submission, which means before you attempt to go for something that may be a winning, something that'll allow you to win, you need to put yourself in the best position for it, so that way you're not taking undue risks in pursuit of that submission. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is a dynamic sport that moves a lot, and a lot of the risk is in that transition and that movement. One example is shooting for a takedown, a double leg takedown. Some inexperienced or very athletic folks will shoot that takedown head first, almost in a spearing motion, right? It's a high risk move, little to no chance for recovery if you miss that shot, but if you nail it, you look great. It makes for great highlight reels. I don't do that. I'm short, stubby legs, things like that. I shoot my takedowns from the hips, right? And the main reason why I shoot my takedowns from the hips is because it allows me to recover if I miss the shot. So I can stand back up and keep going. I don't get pushed down into the mat. Because I can do that, it allows me to have a little bit more confidence in that move. So I can be more aggressive, which gives me a higher success rate because I'm not as risk. It allows me a higher success rate because it's not as risky for me if I fail. So this kind of shows me the importance of considering all the possibilities before I start something. If something doesn't go as planned, I'll be able to recover and pivot elsewhere if needed. Now, the popularity of DevOps is inextricably connected to the rise of public cloud hyperscalers. Countless products and services have been born and grown in the cloud to great success. Conventional wisdom used to maintain that multi-cloud or hybrid cloud was a mistake. The Duckbill Group's chief cloud economist, Corey Quinn, once called it a worst practice, referring to hybrid or multi-cloud. And there's a lot of good advice in that standpoint. There's a lot of ability to take advantage of managed services to help speed up your development. You have a single automation and single observability harness, so you don't have to have a bunch of different things to do the same thing, right? And that's probably one of the biggest factors for your engineering org. It speeds time for you to be able to develop things, for you to be able to implement things, for you to be able to transition and pivot. And that's usually one of the bigger concerns around moving to a new environment is, do I have to retool everything? Do I have to recreate everything? How am I going to rebuild my infrastructure in this environment? You also have easier to manage financial and administrative relationships, whether it's contracts, whether it's payments, whether it's private pricing agreements and things like that. You have the simplicity of support with dealing with a one technology, with one support group and things like that. You can deep dive into the expertise at that point because you have fewer things to learn. And you can engage with the single community for answers or to give answers. But the single cloud provider has some drawbacks. Vendor lock-in isn't always a good thing when it comes to relying on them on keeping up with the competition or being able to have new and exciting technologies that you may want to try. You may be hitting availability issues for certain types of compute or storage within a region. Pricing changes and economic conditions may put you in a situation where you can benefit from adoption or new customer credits. You may need to transition from an OpEx into a CapEx so you can see long-term savings. Or you may end up competing against your service provider for customers. Now, moving to a hybrid or multi-cloud environment comes with a lot of pitfalls, right? You could be creating or maintaining multiple bespoke environments. And then now you have a problem where you have over-specialized automation or over-specialized observability that becomes an entire product that you now have to maintain that becomes more complicated. Replicating your data everywhere, you waste space, you waste money, both not only in storage, but also for egress. Do you need to have everything everywhere? Trying to retrofit your existing code in automation with enough agnosticity to allow it to run on different providers can be a nightmare, right? It comes to the fact that it's usually much harder to modify your existing architecture and your code to work in a different environment if you never consider that possibility from the beginning. So if you may never know if you need to move to another environment or span multiple ones, maybe you don't. But you shouldn't paint yourself into a corner by not thinking about that possibility from the beginning. You don't want to over-specialize in one environment or over-specialize in one platform because you never know down the road if you're going to need to move or expand. So how do you keep your architecture versatile to allow for an easier transition? Well, let's look at service versatility, right? One of the advantages of using a cloud hyperscaler is the managed services. But they also have open source services that you can leverage, Redis, Elasticsearch, Kubernetes, Postgres, and other things like that, where you can have the advantage of a managed service, but your interaction with that service is still something that's global or universal, something that can use anywhere. Whether you're using AKS or EKS or GKE, they all speak Kubernetes, right? So you can still manage those things and manage your architecture or whatever you're deploying on those things. Using the Kubernetes API, you don't have to over-specialize on provider-specific container launching abilities. You have to look at your code versatility. Can my code run on this type of processor? Can it run on that type of processor? Can it run on this type of instance or that type of instance? Do I have to have a certain specialized instance or processor from a specific provider in order for it to be able to run? Sometimes you will, but if you can minimize the amount of code that needs to be specialized onto specific types of architectures, the better off you're going to be. You want to start looking for least expensive patterns for data egress, right? You have to play a bit of the, provider price lookup to figure out how I'm going to move data back and forth between providers or between that provider and my end customer, and look for the least expensive path. There are some providers that have zero charge for object storage. Other providers have a reasonable charge for object storage, but the egress is a little more expensive. Or some providers have more expensive egress but less expensive storage. You want to try to avoid using provider-specific observability, right? If I am relying on CloudWatch to get my metrics for my infrastructure in AWS, how am I going to do it on Google? How am I going to do it within my own data center? Right? Trying to use something that you can aggregate your data as easily as possible without having to have separate observability harnesses for each environment. You want to try and devise a unified security approach to all your environments and rely less on vendor-specific offerings. Now, the time to consider all these things is on the whiteboard. You're going to be warned over and over again not to over-optimize and just double down on what you're currently working on or whatever environment you're in. There's a lot of wisdom in that, but take it with a grain of salt. Your vendor is incentivized to keep you. This doesn't preclude you from putting specialized workloads in an environment that benefits them the most, right? Some things work better in some places than they do in others, and that's fine. But you want to consider those to be the exceptions, and also you want to plan what that's going to look like in a multi-vendor environment, because you're going to need to be aware of how you aggregate metrics and logging and things like that. I know this sounds like a lot. You're probably already saying, bro, I'm not solving all these things on my MVP. And you're absolutely right. You shouldn't be solving these problems in your MVP. But you just want to consider some of these things, so that way you're not restricting your options by making a one-way door decision early. Now, this is especially important when you're going to be considering your development and code deployment pipelines. The appeal for managed services will be there, but all of these considerations still apply. So if you're going to go with a vendor or a service, try to be as agnostic as you can. Consider how to construct tests for multiple environments and what your rollback procedures will look like. And speaking of testing, you're going to want to consider what your backup requirements, retention, lifecycle, and test, because I know we're all testing our backups, could be more provider neutral. Again, if you're a 5-person startup, you're ticking off the ways right now about none of this advice is practicable to you. And I get it. You have to crawl before you can walk. But these are things that you just need to consider as you go forward. Agility isn't just a cult. It's a quality. How well can I move? How well can I pivot? How quickly can I overcome my inertia to put myself in a better position going forward? That said, agility can be helped with some foresight and some planning. Don't charge headfirst into your business's future without giving yourself the ability to recover and change. Thinking ahead, not to solve problems, but simply not to overcommit yourself into a solution, can give your organization the confidence to shoot for success without worrying about being crushed by the 300-pound man of failure. I'm Tim Banks. I'm a lead developer advocate at Dell Technologies. And if you want to hear more about jiu-jitsu or even tech, I suppose, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn.